What would it be like if you were able to create strong, loving relationships that lasted? What would it be like if you were able to build connection with your significant other in a way that you felt a sense of trust, safety, you felt seen, heard, and understood always? In this episode, we're going to be getting into 7 Zen Stoic principles on how to build loving relationships. Welcome to the Zen Stoic Path, where we share a modern take on timeless wisdom to help you create unshakable inner peace. Be sure to join our free school community, the Zen Stoic Dojo, to dive deeper and discuss the podcast and all the insights and questions that you have with like-minded individuals who are on the same path. I'm your host, Victor Pierantoni. Let's get into the show. Now, the Zen and Stoic philosophies both have some very important principles that overlap in a way that really allows us to dive deeper into our relationships so that we can not only experience a strong, healthy relationship between ourselves and our significant other, or even with platonic friendships. But these principles also allow us to feel a deeper sense of inner peace within ourselves, which ultimately allows us to show up better in relationships anyway. So let's get into it. So this first one's going to seem very obvious. However, it is one of the things that many people miss when it comes to relationships. And the first principle is mindful presence and communication. So every time you ever hear a couple talking about what the secret is to their lasting love, they always say the word communication. But for the most part, we hear that word and we just kind of glaze over and be like, all right, cool. Yeah, we got to communicate. But what does that actually mean? So mindful presence and communication essentially means truly listening to the person that is across from you. Epictetus would say that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, so that we should listen more. Now, in listening more and being present to what people are saying and expressing, we're actually able to understand what it is that they actually need. One of the reasons that we don't sometimes understand what our partner needs is because we're coming from this place of actually just wanting to express our own opinions, vent our own frustrations and challenges, rather than actually listen to and be present to the person that's across from us. Now, Thich Nhat Hanh reinforces this idea by saying the most precious thing that we can give others is our presence. Now, why is this so important in relationship? Is because when you are in relationship with somebody, giving your presence and accepting people as they are, not necessarily wanting them to change, and listening to listen, not to respond, is going to be a way that actually allows somebody to feel heard, embraced, and understood. When you practice mindful presence and communication, this builds up a lot of emotional currency. And if you haven't listened to the episode on emotional currency, be sure to check it out, as this is the lifeblood to any relationship. But mindful presence and communication allows you to build more emotional currency, because by being present with somebody, by really hearing them and understanding them, you build up this bank of trust, rapport, and love between you and the other person. So mindful presence and communication is going to be the first principle that is going to help when it comes to not just romantic love, but even platonic love with friends and family. The next principle is going to be compassion and empathy. Now, Marcus Aurelius would talk about this idea of being strict with yourself and tolerant of others. Now, why is this so important? Because when Marcus Aurelius says be strict with yourself, he's not saying to beat yourself up and to just be lenient with others. The way that I interpret what he's saying is that oftentimes you don't really know what somebody has gone through or what they're currently experiencing, but you can be strict with yourself in the sense of committing yourself to showing up with a sense of presence and showing up with a sense of empathy, and essentially being willing to listen to someone else and having that standard for yourself. That's what I interpret when I hear being strict with yourself. It's not necessarily beating yourself up or being too hard on yourself, but it's being strict with yourself to show up with this standard that you're going to prioritize and create emotional currency. Now, emotional currency, I'm going to be talking about it a lot through this episode. And as I was recording it, I realized that. So if you haven't seen the episode, make sure you go check it out. But I'll give you a quick summary on what that is now. Emotional currency is the degree to which people feel safe, seen, heard, understood, respected, and admired with each other. And when you build up emotional currency, it's like you build up this bank of trust, this really solid foundation of emotion that exists between you and the other person. Now, the best thing about emotional currency is that it is utterly unique and beautiful between two parties, and it cannot be faked. So people can try to manipulate other people, but emotional currency is something that is truly felt. And if you're in your body and you're present with yourself, you will know when you're actually creating emotional currency with someone else. But this is really, really important in relationships. So when Marcus Aurelius says, be strict with yourself, I like to be strict with myself, that I always prioritize emotional currency between myself and my fiance, right? It is a willingness to show up and not necessarily need the person to be any different than they are, not needing them to feel any different than they feel, but just being able to be present and accept them for where they're at. Because it is like Pema Chodron would say, is that compassion is not a relationship between the wounded and the healer. Compassion is a relationship between equals. So it's not just being strict with yourself to show up and prioritize emotional currency. It's accepting the person for where they're at, accepting them for what it is that they're sharing with you in that very moment, not needing it to be any different, but simply embracing who it is that's in front of you and allowing them to feel that sense of safety, being seen, being heard, being understood through the process of any kind of communication. The third principle is acceptance and adaptability. So one of the really important things when it comes to relationships is to accept the idea of impermanence. I'd say one of the places of deepest suffering in relationships, whether a person is single, looking for a loving relationship, or they're already in a relationship, is attaching to this idea of permanence. As we've talked about many times on this podcast, that attachment is the root to suffering. It's the second noble truth of Buddhism. And when you think about that, what is it that we attach to? We attach to ideas and thoughts of permanence. So the way that this might show up for somebody who is single, let's say, is they might be asking themselves the question while they're dating, is this person the one? Is this person the one is looking for a sense of permanence in whoever it is that you're interacting with? When it comes to committed relationships, looking and being attached to permanence is perhaps being attached to the way things were and not necessarily embracing the changes that life brings, right? The changes in careers, the changes when you move locations, the changes when you have kids versus when you don't have kids, or you start different projects in your life. So acceptance and adaptability of, number one, impermanence is going to be really key when it comes to relationship. The other thing too is the adaptability and the willingness to be flexible, especially in the realization that you and your partner, or you and your friend, or whoever you're in relationship with, are always going to have, even though you're in relationship or friendship with that person, you're going to have different seasons of your life where things change. And when that happens, sometimes you're not going to be able to be as present as you once were at one point in time. So part of this is giving people the grace to adapt to the situation, to realize that, each person in the relationship is an individual with their own needs and with their own journey. Now, one of the things that really helps my fiance and I in our relationship is that from the beginning, we set this foundation that, yes, we are number one to each other. And at the same time, we also have whatever our North Star is in life, right? Whatever our mission is, our purpose is, and we honor that within each other, and we allow ourselves to paradoxically put ourselves first. So we put ourselves first so that we can put the other first. And in that interesting paradox, we're able to create this beautiful flow of relationship, of communication with each other. And a lot of this comes from the acceptance and adaptability. We accept where each other is at, we adapt to the changes that we're both experiencing, and we navigate them together. One of the things that Marcus Aurelius would talk about is to accept the things that fate binds you to embrace the people that you interact with and that you're in relationship with, and to do so with all of your heart. In other words, to be fully present and in acceptance of what fate has brought you, the people that has brought you into your life, and the relationship that you're in. Now, one thing that I think is really important, especially with this particular principle of acceptance and adaptability, is to always value actions over words. So Stoicism talks about this idea a lot, and in relationship, it is really important. Sometimes people can talk and say that they accept a person for who they are, but ultimately the actions and the way that one person shows up in a relationship is going to dictate whether or not they are truly accepting. It's easy for me to say I accept all the feelings that my partner has, but if I try to change them when she has feelings, when she has, times where she needs to vent, and I try to change things and not let her have her feelings, then I'm not actually accepting and adapting to what's happening in that moment. So all the words that are spoken in relationship, it's important that they are backed with action that is congruent. This is going to be part of having not just a solidarity in relationship, but a solidarity in yourself, right? Committing to the expression of sincerity and being solid within yourself is going to help you when it comes to the matters of building a strong relationship with others. Now, the fourth principle is to cultivate non-attachment and freedom. Now, the way in which we do this to create non-attachment, I always like to refer back to the whole metaphor in Zen, which is the finger pointing at the moon is not the moon. So Thich Nhat Hanh would use that metaphor and discuss how the teachings are not the truth of Zen, but they are merely pointing to the truth. And that's what Zen is all about. It's not necessarily even a philosophy, truly. It's actually a method of direct pointing to the truth through direct experience. So how does this tie back into relationships and creating love and lasting relationships? The way that this ties into it is that it is important to realize that the person that you are in relationship with is not the moon, so to speak. The moon, in the case of relationship, is love itself. And you and the person that you're in relationship with are both pointing to love. You're both cultivating it together in that direction. So what's important to remember here is that it's not the person that is love. It is you and the person are both pointing to love. You are both creating and cultivating that love together. So love is the moon, and each of you is the pointing mechanism towards that. Now, the reason why this is important regarding non-attachment is because when you look at things this way, you realize that you are both on the same team, both pointing to and creating love. And when you look at it this way versus an egoic attachment to my desires, my wants, my demands, then you're actually able to have a communication or a relationship in which you're both on the same side. Whereas when people are in relationships where they are attached to their way of being, or they're attached to the person being a certain way or meeting certain standards that they have arbitrarily created in their minds, that is what's going to create an adversarial relationship, because one person's attached to their ideals, the other person's attached to their ideals, and they're essentially going to be at odds anytime that those are mismatched. So while we practice non-attachment, we realize that in relationship, we are both on the same team pointing to love, both creating that love. And this is actually related to the example that I just gave, which is my fiance and I, we both look at our North Star. The reason why we can put each other first is because in a way we put ourselves first. We're not attached to the other being a certain way or living a certain life. We are simply aimed at what we believe our life purpose and our life mission is individually, and it allows us to come together and give freely to one another. So this is what creates that sense of freedom between the two of us, is that we both have this understanding where it seems paradoxical, but it is actually what allows us to be this way. If, for instance, we had attachment to the idea of putting the other person first, what might happen is that we actually sacrifice our own highest good just to make the other person happy, or just to allow the other person to be appeased in that situation. Now, that's ultimately going to be the breeding ground for resentment. So the key is, in order to practice this non-attachment, in order to practice this being on the same team, it is paradoxical in that you put yourself first and you both agree to put yourselves first so that you can put each other first, which, again, paradox, and works to create a very healthy, happy relationship. And the relationship that I'm in with my fiance is the happiest, healthiest relationship I've ever had, because this is something that we practice together. Now, the fifth principle is mutual growth and self-improvement. So again, I use my relationship as an example for this, because both me and my fiance were both committed on our own to our own growth and development. We are consistently doing the inner work for ourselves, doing the outer work for the goals that we want to achieve, and we're in pursuit of creating something bigger. Now, the reason why this is important is that when we're both growing, we both understand each other's world. We both have an ability to better understand and adapt to the changes and the uncertainties that we each experience. So for example, we're both entrepreneurs. We both have our own business. We both experience similar challenges. But because we're both committed to that growth, and we never make our challenges the other person's problem, but rather support each other in the overcoming of those challenges, we're able to both have a sense of mutual growth in our own ways individually, as well as a couple. So it's important that your partner and you actually have a very similar standard for your own self-growth and development. If one person is growing slower or faster than the other, and they don't understand each other, that can be a breeding ground for miscommunication and some tension that gets created. So when you have a mutual sense, or I would say a similar sense of how you view growth and development, it makes things a lot easier, and it's a lot easier to understand your partner and what they might be going through. So it helps communication, it helps a deeper sense of understanding and appreciation for one another and the experiences that you might be having. The sixth principle is to prioritize emotional currency. Now, I referenced that earlier, but prioritizing emotional currency is going to be one of the most important things that you can do in your relationship. Now, remember, emotional currency is the degree to which a person feels safe, seen, heard, understood, respected, and admired in a relationship. So when you build this together, you are essentially essentially unified by love. You are unified by the interconnectedness of your relationship together. Now, creating emotional currency creates this bank, this really solid foundation that even if you have conflict, which is inevitable in all relationships, but even if you have conflict, you have such a strong foundation of emotional currency and you're so unified by your love for one another that you're able to get through conflicts easily. Now, here's the thing. When a couple does not have emotional currency, the slightest thing can set the other person off. So like the way that somebody, doesn't put the dishes away can trigger an entire fight between people if they don't have emotional currency. However, when there is a richness and an abundance of emotional currency that you've created with your partner, what's going to happen instead is that little things like not putting the dish away or, not putting your stuff away and you leaving it out in the living room, something that might spark a fight in one couple who doesn't have emotional currency might not be a big deal at all or almost unnoticeable or negligible to a couple that does have a strong base of emotional currency. So one of the reasons that this is important is because emotional currency requires you, if you're prioritizing it, it requires you to be present, which we've covered earlier. It requires you to essentially really listen and be there and take in everything that's actually happening in your environment with your partner. And at the same time, emotional currency allows you to always feel safe, seen, heard, and understood. This is really key because the safer that you feel in relationship, the happier you're ultimately going to be. If you don't feel safe in relationship, you don't feel safe to speak your truth or to express what's alive within you, it starts to break down the relationship and erode the relationship. So we want to be able to prioritize this sense of emotional currency because it is essentially the lifeblood of the relationship. It's what allows you to trust. It is what allows you to create that safety, that consistency. It allows you to set, maintain, and fulfill expectations between you and your partner. And the seventh principle is to embrace the moment with gratitude. Now, Stoic philosophy talks a lot about embracing the present moment and having gratitude for all things, loving all things, what is easy, what is difficult, what is preferred and what is not preferred, essentially embodying Nietzsche's principle of amor fati, to love your fate as it is. And when you are in relationship with somebody, being able to have that deep sense of gratitude and love for each moment is really, really key. So as Epicurus would say, do not spoil what you have by desiring what you have not. Now, this is key because sometimes everything in our lives can seem really perfect and beautiful, and then somehow, some way, our subconscious mind tries to sabotage it. And the key here is to remember that each moment is fleeting. We're sensitive creatures who are subject to old age, disease, and death. Right? We can be injured. We are fragile organisms. The very fact that we are these sensitive and impermanent creatures is part of what gives life its meaning. And it especially gives life its meaning in relationships. To embrace the moments that you have with each other with gratitude and grace, to embrace the perfection that already exists and the love that you have for somebody is going to be part of a very strong foundation of relationship. One of the things that I always share with people when they ask me about my relationship is that my fiance, to this day, years into our relationship, every time I ever do something for her, no matter if the favor is something big or little, or if it's a big present or a little present, doesn't really matter what it is. It could be a cup of coffee, flowers, it could be an expensive gift, doesn't really matter. No matter what it is that I do, she always expresses gratitude. She always says thank you, even years into our relationship. And it is that has allowed the enthusiasm of a relationship to continue in the way that it does. Is that, as simple as it sounds, expressing gratitude to one another, saying thank you for even the smallest things that most people take for granted, allows the relationship to thrive in a very powerful way. And I can attest to that. It has allowed me to feel cherished and loved in my relationship. And so these 7 principles will give you the ability to create strong, lasting, and loving relationships using this timeless wisdom to create deeper and stronger bonds with the people that you love. So remember these principles: mindful presence and communication, empathy and compassion, acceptance and adaptability, non-attachment and freedom, mutual growth and self-improvement, prioritizing emotional currency, and embracing the moment with gratitude. Keeping these 7 principles in mind will allow you to build strong, lasting relationships with the people that you love. Using this timeless wisdom will allow you to experience a sense of freedom, joy, and fulfillment in all of your relationships. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're looking to dive deeper or wondering how you can apply these philosophies into your life, be sure to join our free school community, the Zen Stoic Dojo. In the Zen Stoic Dojo, it is a group of like-minded individuals all committed to the path of unshakable inner peace in their health, wealth, and relationships. There you'll find free tools, resources, courses, and individuals that you can discuss the podcast with and ask your most important questions. Be sure to click the link in the description of this podcast to join the Zen Stoic Dojo on School.